Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the Build Room. We are doing something a little bit different today. Some of you have noticed in the background of my earlier videos, my daily driver. And there's been some questions asked, so I figured it was probably about time that we did a quick review on it. I don't intend this to be a review channel by any stretch of the imagination. It is about building things, but a lot of people had questions, so I thought, what's the harm in going through it? And I've owned the car for about, well, coming up on a year now, so I thought it's a good time to sort of give some of my impressions to anyone who's thinking of buying one. Yeah, let's have a look at my 2020 A90 Toyota Supra.
Is that a Supra?
So before we get too far into this car, I thought it might be interesting just to have a look at the history of the Toyota Supra brand. Now, the first Toyota Supra was actually marketed as a Celica XX or a Celica Supra, depending on the market. And the reason for that is that the two cars were heavily intertwined. In fact, the Celica XX basically shared the same rear three quarters of the car as the Celicas of that era, the RA40s. And what it had was a longer bonnet and longer guards and a different nose cone to sort of set it apart visually. And they went from the 4 cylinders that were in the Celicas to 6 cylinders in the Supras. Okay, so that model ran from about 1978 till about 81. And in 1981, we got the A90 or Mark II Supra. Again, that car shared the majority of the rear three quarters of the car with the hatchback Celica at the time. And again, the front bonnet and guards were stretched out to accommodate a 6-cylinder engine up front. So then in 1986, we got the Mark III Supra. Now that was the first Supra that wasn't sharing a platform with the Celica, so it was quite a departure visually from the rest of the range. It came with a variety of different engines, and it was the first, I guess it was the first set of Supras that had quite exciting engines. It ran everything from the 1G 2-litre 6-cylinder, the 7M series, which is a 3-litre 6-cylinder, and then sort of the later models had a 1JZ, which is the I guess the baby 2J, and it had the big R154 gearbox behind it. So I mean, those ones of the Mark III, if you can get a Mark III, get the 1JZ manual. They're a very, very nice car. And then in 93, we moved up to the Mark IV Supra. And that was the one that's made famous by the Fast and the Furious movies. Insert picture here. More than you can afford, pal. You know, that was the one that became I guess the poster car that was in so many people's bedrooms as they grew up. Now, the production of the Mark IV Supra finished up in 1998, I believe. And there was no successor for that range. Toyota declining sales. From what I understand, the emissions played a big part in just not being able to get the 2J to pass emission controls in some countries. And yeah, I guess it was a bit of a sad moment for Supra lovers everywhere. But yeah, there was really nothing to replace it. And that ran until this car, the Mark V. Now, the Mark V had been sort of teased as a bunch of different cars. So there was an FT1 prototype that was unveiled and really looks absolutely amazing. I'll put a picture of the FT1 up there as well. And then in late 2019, the first 2020, Supras rolled off the production lines, and this was one of those. And it was a really interesting process. So I owned a Mark IV. I had a Mark IV and owned it for about 2 weeks before it was unfortunately written off in a really bad hailstorm that we had here in Western Australia. I drove it for a while, basically like a rolling silver golf ball, but in the end, the insurance company took that car back and paid me out. So it was really disappointing. I didn't get as much time as I wanted to with the car, and I always wanted to own another one, which is why when the Mark V came up for sale, I thought I sort of was in a position where I was able to take advantage of that and thought I'd scoop one up. So purchasing one of these was actually a departure from your standard model. Now, there were only 300 that were slated for release of the 2020 Supras in Australia. they didn't sell them in dealerships. You actually had to go online, and there was a standard deposit process, not a bidding or anything like that, but just a deposit process. And on a certain time at a certain date, they opened up. They were split into 3 allocations that they did over, from memory, about 3 months. And they would basically put 100 cars up, and then people would put deposits down, and as soon as the 100 were taken, closed down. Now, that first allocation that I actually picked up mine in sold out in 7 minutes. Now, that's probably indicative of people who were either thinking they were an investment or were thinking they would be a quick flip. Now, the quick flippers were probably disappointed. This is a $55,000 US car. In Australia, with Australia tax and our exchange rate, it works out to $95,000. And then once you figure in dealer delivery, metallic paint extras, any interior upgrades, and our, well, especially in WA, our registration and transfer fees are quite high. So this is about a $105,000 car at the end of the day. Now, when they first came out, people had crazy prices on them, like, you know, flipping them directly for $125,000, $130,000. And look, I don't know if any sold at that price, but it was certainly an interesting dynamic to see play out. Now, it looks like Toyota are in for the long haul with the Supra brand. It currently has a roadmap until 2025. And they are planning to close out the Mk5 in 2025, and they've sort of promised that each year it's going to get progressively better. And we'll go through what some of those changes might mean as we review this car. But generally speaking, it's an amazing car. I'm really happy with it. It's fast enough for a car that I drive daily on the street. It is very comfortable, very drivable, very well thought out. And even though it's probably had, I would say, mixed reviews on the internet, but generally speaking, I found it to be quite an impressive car. The biggest complaint that you're going to hear from Supra haters is that this isn't a Supra. And what people mean by that when they are sledging it online is that this is a co-developed car with BMW, and it's based on the Z4 platform. It has the same engine as the Z4, the same chassis underpinnings, a lot of BMW based interior parts, but the bodywork and things like that are all 100% Supra unique. Now, to me, I don't have a problem with that. We are getting to a point in the development of automobiles where these types of cars are a dying breed. Rear-wheel drive, high-powered, turbocharged, petrol-burning engines may well soon be a thing of the past in anything other than, you know, $250,000 hypercars that are basically just fighting the evolution of a species. And you even see those manufacturers saying that they are going to be moving towards hybrid and fully electric supercars, sort of in the time frame that this car is slated for, which is that 2025 deadline. From my perspective as well, getting into bed with BMW to build a car is not a bad thing. I mean, so many people love the 86, the BRZ, or I think in America it's the Scion FRS. You know, that's triple branded car in the same markets. It's not like they only sell the Subaru BRZ in the US and they sell the 86 here. These are competing in the same places, and they are all the same car, and it's literally badge engineering. There's just a different badge on the different brands of car and a few minor tweaks just to sort of set them apart, like, you know, different brake lights and things like that. Now, with this car, it's not the same story. This is a wholly different body. The suspension tuning and things like that was done all in-house by Toyota and is vastly different from the Z4 if you've ever driven one of those. The interior screams BMW, but geez, all right, let's have a look here. Let's quickly go through the range. We could show you a Land Cruiser, a Corolla, a RAV4. What else have we got? Let's even go for the 86. Now, apart from maybe the 86 is really the only one that's got a lot going for it, the rest of those interiors are junk. At least with BMW, you know you're getting a quality interior that's well thought out and has been around for a while and had some evolution. So, you know, Toyota is renowned for having weirdly placed buttons and just not a driver-friendly layout in their cars, and that's something that you don't get in a BMW. And so from my perspective, I mean, I've owned an M3 and a 135, and, you know, they were very comfortable cars to drive. They were very well thought out, and they performed really well. So I don't get why all the hate on that one. It just doesn't make sense to me. Now, the second complaint you're going to hear from people online is, oh my God, it's got fake vents. So there are a number of vents on the car, and people will run through and count them, and I don't know how many there are, but it's not really that important to me, but they'll count these vents that don't go anywhere. So when the car first came out, Toyota actually took a lot of automotive journalists through this vehicle, the head engineer of Toyota. They made statements like, the car is a performance-oriented car, it's meant for future growth in the tuner market, and yada, 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 and all that sort of marketing speak. And, you know, these are all able to be made working at some point if you decide to track the car or whatever. Now, actually, a lot of these aren't able to be made operable. This vent here, there's nothing but there's sheet metal behind it, so I don't know what they're ever planning there other than maybe a minor amount of draw through. The ones on the doors, again, they don't go anywhere, and there is no way without cutting big holes in the chassis to direct that air to the brake ducts or anything like that. But to me, vents that aren't operable, who really cares? Cars are supposed to be an aesthetic, visual thing to look at, as well, at least in the performance car world. No one wants a sports car or a supercar that looks like a fridge, unless you happen to be running one around the Nürburgring. So, you know, I think it was just trying to find something to complain about, because to be honest, there's not that much that this car has going against it. Okay, so that's probably enough of the internet hate. Let's have a proper look around the car now and see what it's like in the real world. Okay, so stepping back and taking everything in, this car is definitely a head turner. Certainly not your everyday Camry or Mondeo. It looks like a proper sports car, but it's also unique and a little bit of crazy, like only machines from Japanese car makers or high-end exotics can be. It has a long nose and a set-back cabin. It's got a heavily raked windscreen topped with that iconic double bubble roof for some all-important headroom. It has a really high hip line and tiny side windows, and the lines draw your eye up towards the huge glass-panelled hatch, which has that integrated ducktail spoiler. Looking closer at the front of the car, the first thing you notice is the strong angles on the nose and the gaping bell mouth below it. It's accompanied on either side by some of the biggest headlights I've ever seen on a car this size, and they're truly an impressive design. They have 6 individual projector headlights on each side, and they're punctuated by some red accents and underscored by the longest daylight running lamps I've seen on the planet. Those daylight running lamps also double as indicators. One other thing you'll notice about the front of the car is the complete lack of a reasonable stock mounting location for a number plate. Toyota provided one, but it's a giant blemish on what is otherwise a beautiful front end. So I've opted for a Perrin race mount, which is offset and screws into the standard tow hook location. Adding to the theatre, there's also a contrasting black front splitter with side canards as standard, and that's continued down the sides and to the matching rear diffuser. Moving back, the next interesting feature is the clamshell hood. It makes for an amazing looking front bonnet, similar to an Audi R8, but I do wish that Toyota had spent just a little bit more time making the gap smaller so they matched up with the rest of the car. Luckily, Australian delivered cars aren't required to have the ugly reflectors in the sides of the front and rear bumpers, so there's nothing to distract you from the sporty looks, the door vents, or those massive haunches over the rear wheels. Speaking of the wheels, I think that the GTS's 19-inch rims are a really good looking shape, although I do question the hybrid polished and black colour scheme. The limited editions have the same wheels in a full satin black, and I think they look much better. The GT models had an 18-inch rim, which really aren't my cup of tea, but they might be good for people to pick up on the second-hand market as cheap wheels for track days. I've plastic dipped my rims and mirror covers red for something a little bit more interesting, and it also ties in with the accents in the headlights, the engine bay, and the badging. Braking on those track days will be taken care of by a massive set of Brembo brakes. The GTS models are the same size as the GTs, but the GTSs are coated red for that mad street cred. To contrast the red rims that I've done, I've also plastic dipped my brake calipers in satin black, and I've thrown some vinyl logos on similar to what you will see on the 2021 models. Coming to the rear end, this is definitely the best angle of the car. It's almost like Toyota intended this to be the common view that most people would see out in the wild. The taillights in the adjacent vents are the real heroes here, and that race feel is really driven home by the complex rear diffuser, and that's punctuated by dual 4-inch exhaust tips. The exhaust actually has a diverter flap which opens up in sports mode and actually provides a pretty reasonable noise for a stock exhaust in 2020.
Nestled between those exhausts is a reverse light that is clearly inspired by Formula One rain lights, and above that to the right is the GR badge, which stands for Gazoo Racing. Gazoo Racing is Toyota's racing arm, and they have a finger in the pie at Le Mans, the World Rally Championship, and the Dakar Rally, amongst other things. Circling back to the engine bay and its 3 litres of turbocharged B58 goodness, it's pretty standard fare for a modern bay. All the fun stuff is actually pretty ugly and it's complicated, so it's all covered up by fairly boring plastics. Somewhat interesting, however, is the 6 notches that provide detail on the engine cover, and that actually indicates that this is a 6-cylinder engine. While that's the only option for 2020 models, the 2020 Supra does come with a 4-cylinder variant. I can't wait to see the value of 6-cylinder covers skyrocket on eBay for the 4-cylinder fakers out there. With the bonnet open, you can clearly see the details of that clamshell bonnet and the guards that are capped in the Supra logo. The bonnet actually has 2 latches just to be safe, and it's further nanny stated by having to pull the interior lever twice to open it. It actually takes a drop from a considerable height to close, and that's actually recommended in the Toyota Owner's Manual. So the 2020 model actually has these fairly obvious empty slots at the front of the engine bay, and they're just waiting to be filled by some chassis braces. I actually think they're going to do that on the 2020 model. In reality, there's nothing too exciting here unless you start pulling the covers off. But on the plus side, there is already a lot of really sexy stuff coming to the aftermarket scene to dress up the bay.
Okay, so that's pretty much it for the outside of the car. Why don't we take it for a drive? Okay, so time to see what this whole talking and driving gig's about. Let's start with the interior. You'll notice it's a 2-seater. The first 2-seater Supra offered, and as far as I'm concerned, the rear seats in the old models were pretty much garbage, so it's good riddance to bad rubbish. Space-wise, I am not a svelte guy, and I'm just over 6 foot. I don't have a lot of headroom here. I have this seat as low and as far back as it will go, and if I had a helmet on at a track day, this would probably be really uncomfortable. I'm also really far reclined in the seat, and that's for 2 reasons. Firstly is it gives me a little bit of extra headroom, and secondly, the non-adjustable headrests on these seats are really far forward, and I think that's a crash safety thing now on modern cars, but they aren't adjustable, and they're not removable either. The 86 BRZ, you can actually take the headrests out and turn them around, and that's especially important when you're thinking about a track day when you have the extra thickness of a helmet as well. But the seats themselves are really comfortable. The leather's great, they look amazing, and they have electronic controls for everything. So they also have the standard BMW memory system. So if you're alternating drivers in a car, you can simply just hit a button and it'll go back to a pre-programmed preset for your personal preference. Seats are almost there. I just wish that Toyota could have made them adjustable in the headrests and about an inch lower overall. As you'd expect with an interior that's been designed by BMW, everything's really well laid out. All the controls are close to hand and they make sense in terms of their positioning. There is a couple of gripes I would have. The first one is the placement of the cup holders. Now they're just over at the back of the console, and basically anytime you have a drink bottle or something in there and you go to adjust the iDrive or move the transmission selector, you're going to be banging your elbow on that one. And also the wireless phone charger, which is at the front of the console, and is a great feature, mind you, but you'll find that if you're using the USB ports or the 12-volt port that are just behind them, it really gets in the way of you trying to take your phone in and out of that. It does have one really good feature though, because it is so far out of the way. If you leave your phone in at charging and then you get out of the car, it will actually chime and put a warning on the dash to remind you that you've left your phone in the car. That said, the console has a fantastic padded area for the driver to brace their knee against in hard cornering, and it is shrouded in this beautiful high gloss carbon fibre. I wish they had put more carbon fibre throughout the cabin. I think it looks really good. It's not like the cheap overlays that some other cars have. The infotainment system is BMW's iDrive, which is obviously class leading. It's connected to a 12-speaker JBL sound system. This is the GTS, so it's the premium sound system. It has 6 speakers behind me, including 2 subs, 2 speakers in each door and 2 in the dash. Now, to be honest, if you're an audiophile, it's not going to set your world on fire. It's pretty much a standard BMW premium sound system, and companies like BavSound have made a living off replacing those. Unfortunately, this year also missed out on Android Auto. It does have Apple CarPlay, but I think we're going to have to wait until the 2021 model before it'll actually support a good phone. It does have Bluetooth, digital radio, auxiliary inputs and things like that. So overall it does a pretty decent job, and it's not going to upset too many people. And let's face it, it's not the real noise you want to hear in the car anyway. Oh, I'll never get tired of that. Okay, so the instrument panel is all LED. It has a large center tack. It has gear indicators, digital speedo, and all of your normal warnings, navigation and things like that. So being a GTS, this car also has a head-up display. Now that head-up display shows you your current speed, the speed limit of the area that you're in, and I found that updates quite frequently. It's quite reliable. It also shows you any navigation directions, and if you're following too close or anything like that, it shows you those driver safety warnings. To be honest, it's a really effective piece of kit. I always thought it was a bit of a gimmick, but you come to rely on it fairly quickly. I find that when I get into other cars, I'm checking the windscreen to see what speed I should be doing, and if I'm listening to navigation on my phone, I'm looking for those directions on screen. I do think that Toyota missed an opportunity here though. It would have been really great that if you dropped it into sport mode, it would update the display. Maybe something along the lines of putting a gear indicator where the speed limit's supposed to be, because if you're in sport mode, you probably don't care about the speed limit anyway. And maybe even showing a tachometer or even a shift light when you're in manual mode. That would have been really cool. The steering wheel, there's been a lot of hate on that for it not looking as premium as it should. I actually quite like it. It feels very good in the hand. Again, the controls are all where they need to be. There is a manufacturer out there, I'm not sure who it is. If I can find it, I'll put a link in, that are making carbon fiber inserts for the bottom. That does make it look a little bit better. But yeah, to be honest, it doesn't really bother me that much. At the end of the day, the interior is not what I own this car for. Other than that, it's pretty much standard fare in here. There is a tiny little glove box. There are a few storage nets and cubbies around the car, but there's not much else. And to be honest, that's what sport cars are about. They're not supposed to have, a million screens everywhere and every feature under the sun. It's just about the driving experience. And to be honest, I can't really fault the driving experience on this one. The limited edition models came with red leather seats and a bunch of red leather accents around the cabin. I'm not a huge fan of that. I think it's been done before. I mean, think about cars like the E46 M3 even. And it's just a little bit too much for me to live in an everyday car. At 290 litres, there's no shortage of space in the boot, but without a rear seat, the only thing between you and those 290 litres sliding forward under heavy braking is the sub box, and that doesn't completely fill the gap. So the Supra doesn't have a spare wheel, so instead in the boot there's your standard tow hook, little toolkit, a bottle of wheel goo and an air compressor, and that's in a cubby just in front of the rear fuse box. There's also a 12-volt port right next to that pump, which is handy in the event that you get a flat or if you're going to a track day. Now the boot on the Supra is quite a weird shape, but as you can expect from Toyota, there's method to the madness, and it's actually designed that way so that it can fit 2 full-size rear wheels, just for those times where you have to go drifting and you don't have a tow car. Speaking of the boot cover, if you drive with it open like I am now, you basically add +10 sound to the noise of the car from where the driver's sitting. It sounds great. So that really wraps it up for the interior. Overall, the car feels great. It's a really nice place to be. I feel great every time I'm in here, and I really love driving it. Speaking of which, how about we find a road where we can actually open her up a bit? Alright, so it looks like the weather's turned on us and we've hit a bit of rain, so that's definitely going to put a dampener on things. So under the bonnet we have a BMW B58. It's a 6-cylinder, 3-litre twin-scroll turbo engine. So twin-scroll turbo means that the engine has a single turbo, but it has 2 air paths, and what that does is it enables you to increase your exhaust overlap and your scavenging, which makes for more efficiency, more power, better fuel economy, that kind of thing. So the engine also has Vanos, which is BMW's implementation of variable valve timing, and it also has Valvetronic, which is variable valve lift. From a fueling perspective, it's direct injected, which gives more control over the fuel, so you get a cleaner burning, more efficient engine, but also means that Toyota owners are going to have to think about walnut blasts in their future. Toyota's quoted figures for the engine are 335 horsepower and 495 newton meters of torque. Those are considered to be relatively modest estimates, with most cars in the real world being dynoed at 335 or above at the wheels. The manufacturer figures are at the flywheel. So when you factor in the 10 to 15% driveline loss, you're actually talking about an engine that has horsepower in the high 300s. So the horsepower of the 2021 Supra is actually an area that Toyota are saying they're making big gains. Now, while the car's not widely available in Australia yet, the cars that have been dynoed in the US are showing 40 to 45 more horsepower at the wheels, which kind of lines up with what Toyota are claiming, which is an extra 50 at the flywheel. So backing up that engine is an 8-speed ZF gearbox. There's no 3-pedal or DCT option here. Being a bit of a purist, I probably would have gone a manual if one was available, but I can understand Toyota's logic here. Unfortunately, I think manuals are a bit of a dying breed, even in sports cars, for a couple of reasons. Firstly is the complexity of getting gearboxes and clutches to work comfortably with high horsepower, high torque motors that rev quite high. Secondly is the massive improvement that we've seen in the quality of dual clutch transmissions and even standard auto transmissions. The days of power robbing, slow, sloppy shifting autos are just gone. And if you need an example where modern gearboxes show their advantages over traditional manuals, check out this video from Stradman where his 2020 Supra absolutely gaps his Lamborghini Gallardo.
Come on, Gallardo, go! No! No! No!
Overall, it's a really impressive gearbox. In fact, it's probably a little too good. It shifts so quickly that you don't get that torque rush that you would normally get out of a manual, basically due to the time between shifts. So it doesn't give you that same sense of power, but trust me, it's there. At the tail end, we've got an electronically controlled LSD that's got more brains than most, and it's a good one. Taking the Supra out past its limits of grip is pretty easy and pretty controllable. It's got amazing grip in the dry from the Michelin Pilot Super Sports, but you do have to be a little bit careful in the wet, especially with the stability control off. Apart from the driveline, a lot of what impressed about this car is actually related to the chassis itself. It's got a 50-50 weight distribution, it's got a stiffer chassis than an LFA, and a lower centre of gravity than a BRZ. Basically, it's as sure-footed as a mountain goat. On the road, it's very compliant and comfortable. The electronically dampened suspension really does its job, and you can set your own comfort levels in the infotainment system. In the corners, it's got a bit of roll, and that's similar to the R35 GTR. I think it's there to give the car a bit more feel under cornering Gs, and I think for those of us that don't live our lives in a race suit and helmet, we'll probably appreciate it. Brakes are really strong. I haven't found the point of fade on the road under spirited driving yet, and all the reports from the track say it's equally as impressive. They're actually Brembos, but they're not badged as such, which is interesting, and I think they fixed it on the 2021 Supra. Instead of bearing a Brembo logo though, it'll read Supra in the standard Toyota Supra script. My only real complaint about the brakes would be that under really low speed braking, or especially with the transmission creep that's built into this, when you're taking off from lights and things, the brakes can groan, and that's even worse when it's wet. Sound wise, I think it's pretty good for a stock car. Sport mode opens up a second pathway in the exhaust system, and it also activates a burble tune, so you get all of those crackles and pops when you're decelerating or downshifting. In terms of the way the car's received on the road, I get a lot of thumbs up and nice car mates. There's always people taking photos, whether it's on the road or in a car park. I think there's a bit of a novelty factor there, even for people that really wouldn't know what a Supra is. Two main questions that I get asked are, how much did you pay and how fast is it? Now, the first one we covered earlier in this episode, and the second one, the answer is fast. So the real world reviews are showing 0 to 100 times around the 4 to 4.2 second mark, and they're sort of dispatching the quarter in either flat or low 12s. And to be honest, that's got to be fast in pretty much anyone's definition. There's faster cars out there, particularly when you start looking at all-wheel drive hypercars, but to be honest, it's more than enough for the street, and it's proven to be really competitive on the track as well. It was built to beat the Porsche Cayman, and actually in a recent review, Motor Trend put this on track and it won against the BMW M2 competition. So with more power on tap in 2021, things are only going to get better. The final thing I'd like to say about the car is to remind people of what Supras are all about. Supras have never been the biggest, baddest kids on the block in stock form. What they are is a great sports car and a phenomenal base platform for tuning. People are already seeing 600-700 horsepower from these with stock internals. There's actually a 1,000 horsepower one from Papadakis Racing out at the moment, and that's really worth a look. There's also a big aftermarket support base forming for exterior, suspension, internal and external mods. The possibilities are pretty much endless. I might be a one-eyed optimist here, but I think this Supra is going to end up being as popular as the last. So the sun's getting low. I think it's about time we wrap this up. But before we do, I just want to get some decent exhaust shots from the outside of the car for you so you can really hear the sound and show you one of the cool features on the infotainment system. I've also got some interesting little bits of kit that Toyota gave to the early adopters of the Supra. So we'll head home now and I'll show you some of those and then we'll finish this off. Okay, so we'll see what it's like. We're not going to launch it and we are going uphill. So it's just basically to show you the torque and power display, which is an interesting feature. And here's some of the sound. Waiting. Okay, so we're back at the house now, and I just wanted to give you guys a look at some of the loot that you get with the purchase of a new Supra, or at least the launch editions. So firstly, you get a Toyota Supra cap, because we're racing on the side. You get a Toyota Supra pen inside an A90 case. This was from the place that I bought mine from, not from Toyota directly, but it's a keyring and a torch. Nothing particularly special there. Also get a branded, this is a Hurricane umbrella, and it's, I won't open it up inside because that's bad luck, but it does have Toyota Supra written all over it. And then the piece de resistance, which is, let's see if I can get that working again. No, okay. It's basically a pack that contains some leather driving gloves, a lanyard, a congratulations on the purchase of a new vehicle thing, and then also a Toyota Supra Gazoo Racing picture book. I don't know if everybody in the world got the same type of kit with their car. There's different stories of people getting different things, and I would imagine that the stuff that I got from my dealer directly is not the same as everyone else's, but it is a fair amount of stuff to get with the car. I'm probably never going to use any of it, but it's quite interesting to have it all here. So anyway, we'll pack this up now and finish up the video. Okay, so I think that's where we're going to leave it today, guys. Overall, really impressive car. I'm really enjoying owning it, and I'd recommend if you have the opportunity to get in and drive one, do so. Next week we'll roll back into our standard Violet Crumbles build, but for now, thanks for tuning in and watching another episode of the Build Room. See you soon.